There's a chemical reaction that happens when you hit the record button that it activates your tongue to, I don't know, whatever.
Oh my gosh, I love it. All right, I'll try. Take 3. Everybody, welcome to the Shut Up and Do It podcast, a place you can come and hang out with us while we go through all things real estate and business with a focus on bringing you top quality topics and speakers, all who believe in a shut up and do it manner. I'm your host, Nick Allerud, host of the Shut Up and Do It podcast, creator of the coaching platform REI Accelerated, and a principal with AA Real Estate Group. We are an active buyer and educator in 10 markets across the country, based in Greater Boston with a fix and flip, property management, wholesale, brokerage, and rental holdings company. And we function as an educator and networker to bring value to folks just like you looking to start or scale your businesses. Today, we have an extremely special guest. He's back on for a reappearance. If you all want to go back, you can hear some gold as this man's. He packed so much information into a 40-minute podcast. It was actually podcast number 10. If you want to go back, you can take a look at that. His experience in not just multifamily real estate, but his experience in life is something that everyone should need to hear about. He's actually on today to promote a book that he created, which goes through all of his struggles and his life. All of it. I'm going to let him tell the story. But before you need to do that, if you don't know who he is, this Matt Picheny has bought and sold roughly 2,500 units in multifamily real estate. He's a former actor on stage, and he was also a big tech guy. But we're going to let him talk about it. Matt, thank you for coming back on, man. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here. You said it was episode number 10 that I was on before?
I just checked it. Episode number 10. Yeah.
And what episode are you on now, roughly? Do you know?
Oh, gosh. Well, when this one goes out, I'm not sure. Maybe 80-something, 90-something.
Wow.
Almost 100.
That's amazing. That's amazing, man. It was one of the first podcasts I was ever on as a guest. So, it was awesome. It was a while ago. It was like 3 or 4 years ago, I think.
It was, yeah. We at least a couple. It was when before masks, pre-masks.
Yes, it was pre-masks.
Well, Matt, you have written a book called BackStage Guide to Real Estate Investing. I see it BackStage Guide to Real Estate. I see it right behind you next to your awards that I'd love you to chat about too. But why don't you, let's go back to the very beginning. For those of you who didn't hear your story, do you mind just shedding a little bit of light on who you are, where you came from, and what you're up to?
Sure. Think back to 2001. Where were you in 2001? Because for me, this is, before the towers went down, I was working in digital marketing, and the dot-com bubble had burst. I had my own boutique agency, but all my clients were either going out of business or not spending money on their digital marketing efforts. And at that exact same time, my landlord came to me and said, "Hey, Matt, you got 90 days to get out." So my business was imploding, but so was my personal life. I needed to find a new place to live. And during that time, for me at that point with my business imploding, it was like, what am I going to do? This was like scaling Mount Everest, trying to find a new place in New York City to live and qualify for it without really having a job. So I went and I got a job. Showtime the cable channel was a client of mine. They offered me a job to come in-house. So I started working there. And I found a new place to live. I wanted to live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Rental prices were high, but my sister lived all the way up in Washington Heights, which is at the upper end of Manhattan. And she saw on a bulletin board a little ad for someone who was selling an apartment. So I actually bought an apartment instead of renting. And about 2 years later, I sold that apartment, and I quadrupled the money that I had put down on the apartment when I first bought it. And I was like,
of course, everything was intentional.
Bingo. No, definitely not. I needed a place to live. I knew buying an apartment was like a smart thing to do. My father had been in residential real estate, and I used him to bounce ideas and things off of. And the calculation was that, look, but I had a little bit of money saved up that I could use for that down payment. And then my monthly payments actually for owning in this particular situation, owning on the upper in Washington Heights versus renting on the Upper West Side would save me about $500 a month. So that was huge for me. So it's like, oh, I save money and I gain this thing called equity, which I didn't know what it was, but I was learning, right? And starting to get ownership in property. But what blew my mind was that 4 years later, I'd be able to sell it and quadruple my money. And then with those winnings with that profit, I went ahead and bought an apartment on the Upper West Side, which is where I wanted to live all along, and was able to parlay that into that new purchase. But that was a big light bulb moment for me of, wow, there's really something to this real estate thing. I need to find out, how can I do that again and again and again and again, because it was monumental for me.
That was awesome. So that was your beginnings in New York. And that you, as you mentioned, in 2001, before the towers even came down, there was a load of pain that people were already feeling, right? With what happened there. So as you go through, so I as I told Matt, I got about halfway through his book, and I felt awful because I didn't finish it by this conversation, but I knew a little bit of the story because he and I have chatted before. Tell me so you transplanted then. Your next move was a transplant from New York back down to where you grew up, right? Not
yeah,
quite.
That's right. So over the course of years, so I moved in the Upper West Side. I met my wife. We got married. She got pregnant, and we moved first to Brooklyn because we needed a bigger space. We were living in a little 1-bedroom in Manhattan. So we moved to Brooklyn into a townhouse, and we were here. Our child was born. We were here about a year when Erica got approached completely out of the blue with a really cool job opportunity, but it was in Miami, Florida. So we left New York, moved to Miami, kept the townhouse in New York, and rented it out. So we had some good cash flow going from that. And we moved to Miami. And that's when I transitioned from doing real estate as a hobby to doing real estate full-time. Because the advertising world that I had worked on in New York for almost 18 years. So, after Showtime, I went into the advertising world and worked at a number of different agencies in New York. Worked on, these big Fortune 500 projects for like Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble and Visa and Verizon, yada, yada. They didn't really have things of that scale in Miami. And I was burned out from doing the agency thing. And I had been doing real estate as a hobby at that point for almost 10 years because I had started doing some other things. I had bought some land and built a vacation home there and was renting that out, and said, I really want to try to take this real estate thing, which is a hobby, and see if I can do it full time, since I can't really find something comparable from an advertising industry world. It just didn't seem to make sense. And I was tired of it. So I went ahead, I started doing the real estate full time, and that was over 6 years ago now, and found pretty quickly my niche, which is in apartment syndication. And so that's what I focus on, is syndicating large apartment complexes that we purchase across the United States.
That's awesome. I'm going to go back to one key quote you just said, and I'm going to go to one of your chapters called Taking the Shot, right? Or Take the Shot. Yeah. You just mentioned, so I went real estate investing full time. And I'm sure it's that easy, right, Matt? No, I want you to go through in your head, dropping, right, your benefits, dropping the W-2, dropping the stability. What went through your head during that time?
I actually do talk about it quite a bit in the book. And that chapter is called Taking My Shot. And, it's really sort of a paying tribute, if you will, to Hamilton. So my background, when I first moved to New York, prior to the digital marketing stuff, I was a professional actor. So for 5 years, I was a professional actor, been in 15 productions throughout the US. And my wife is involved in the theater full time. That's her job. That's what she does. That's her W-2. And so being in this world, we've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to invest in some Broadway shows. I mean, I think you could also say unfortunate as well. It just depends on how you want to look at it, because 80% of the shows on Broadway actually don't even recoup their initial money. So investors will lose money. But if you are lucky enough, and hopefully, you know, we like to think that we're smart about it. We've lost money in shows that we've invested in, but we were very fortunate to have invested a little teeny bit into Hamilton. So Hamilton was a big hit, and also just something that we love. We loved that show so much, which was part of the reason why we invested in it. We saw it early before it was on Broadway, and just thought it was phenomenal. So we used to listen to the cast album all the time. So I was in Miami in a new place, and I was listening to an audiobook, which was Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And when I needed breaks from Kiyosaki, I was listening to Hamilton. And one day I'm listening to Hamilton, I'm listening to the song My Shot, where there's, you know, Lin-Manuel Miranda, the entire cast of Hamilton saying, take a shot, take a shot, take a shot. Meanwhile, I've just been listening to Kiyosaki talk about, you know, creating passive streams of income and sort of like leaving the rat race. And you know, it just all kind of came together in almost a eureka moment of like, what am I doing? Like, I need to do real estate. Like, this is what I like doing. This is what I'm interested in. And I sat down with Erica and I talked with her about it. And, you know, we were fortunate, right, in the fact that, number one, Erica had a W-2 job, which had benefits. Okay, so that's the first thing. And secondly, we had a couple of streams of passive income already. Number one, the townhouse in Brooklyn that we owned, that we still kept. We were renting in Miami, a teeny tiny little place in Miami, but just for somewhere to live. But we were positive cash flow from the property in Brooklyn. We were getting little checks every month, right? And we were also getting checks every month from Hamilton, which was doing very well at the time, still is. But it was so we were in a position where I could go ahead and try this new venture. Now, I wasn't at the time, and I still don't to this day, drive around in a Maserati. I mean, they're cool cars and everything, but I'm not like this, you know, I don't have my own jet or anything like that. We were living a very modest lifestyle in Miami. You know, we were renting, I mean, it was a house that we were renting, but it was an old rundown house that we were renting. You know, and we actually needed 2 cars in Miami. One we had been given to us as a gift by Erica's parents. And then my dad actually my parents lived in Orlando. That's where I grew up. He gave me his car because he was pretty much too old to be driving anyhow. But like, I mean, it was like, we were really scraping to kind of keep this thing going. But eventually I was able to turn this real estate. I mean, anyone who's ever started a business, as I'm sure you've had tons of people on your podcast, it's tough at the beginning. There's not a lot of cash coming in, but we were able to just, you know, hunker down a little bit for a few years until the business grew.
That was it. You nailed it. Right. And we did, as you know, anyone who comes on this podcast has to share a personal or professional struggle that they've been through. Right. And you shared too on your last, but you just had packed of information. Learning to take the shot, right? Learning to take the shot and you being at that right time in the right place. Most of the people who watch this podcast already know Robert Kiyosaki. Every single person we've interviewed has read the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. If you have not read that book and you are listening to this podcast right now, you should even stop this episode, go read that, come back and listen to the rest of this. It talks about employee and self-employed and being a business owner to an investor, the quadrant. And it also, as Matt alluded to, talks about building enough passive income to offset your living expenses. And once you have done that, not active income, not W-2, not earned income, not where you're trading your time for money, but when you actually have enough passive investments that exceed your day-to-day living expenses, you are at that point financially free and out of what he calls the rat race, which is exactly, Matt, what you aimed to do. And it sounds like it took you said 2 years, 3 years?
Well, I think it was 2 or 3 years before I was really generating what I would consider any amount of substantial income. You know, but it was, I mean, I don't know what substantial means.
Sure,
Anything worth
if you don't
even
mind, use
writing
numbers.
myself
We'd love
a
to get.
check for. Well,
Yeah.
I don't have like my, accounting information like right in front of me, so I don't want to
Sure.
like say one thing or another. But it was not. It was. I mean, the first several years were losses, right? I mean, the business as a whole was losses, and but I'm at a point now where I have a salary. Like I was able to actually, are you familiar with Gusto? I love
little bit.
this. I
Yeah.
don't want to like plug programs or anything, but I use Gusto and I have payroll, right? So I actually been giving myself a paycheck for a couple of years now, and it started off. I mean, I think my initial salary that I was giving myself was like $20,000 a year, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it was very, very modest a few years ago, and now it's gotten up to be, substantial. I'm not making gazillions of dollars, but a little something. So
The Maserati is not the goal, right? It's independence and freedom that is the goal. That's what I keep preaching to people. Like you can get the Lamborghini.
The goal is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the goal is to be able to spend time with my family whenever I want, right? That's the goal.
Amen.
The goal is like, all right, me and my family are going to go and do whatever, this thing or that thing or whatever. And that's really where I want to be. And I'm pretty close. So it's been really good. It's been very good.
That's so cool, Matt. So in your first 2 years that you went full time, what did you do every day? So let's go day one. Day one, you quit your job, right? And I want to know because I know what went through my mind when I was crazy enough to quit my banking job. So what went through your mind day one? Like, what did you set yourself up? How did you set yourself up to be successful?
Well, I don't know that I had a plan day one.
Same.
I was like, I'm going to figure this out. I just need to go whole hog, right? And so the interesting thing is I've done it before. Okay. I've done it twice before, which is what I talk about in my book. I didn't realize necessarily I had done it twice before until I wrote my book. And then I was like, oh, wow, I had done this before. And I kind of knew, like, I had a confidence, not like, wasn't arrogant, but I was like, I feel like I can do this. And the reason why is, look, I moved to New York City. I went to a musical theater conservatory, and then I was out auditioning. I didn't really have much, I mean, my parents helped me out a little. They didn't have a lot of money. And it's not like I was scrappy. I mean, I worked several jobs. I was waiting tables and selling t-shirts at Broadway shows, and playbills, and like doing whatever I could to make ends meet. And in between acting gigs, and then I'd get an acting gig, and I never really made a lot of money doing those things. But before I had moved to New York, I liked theater. I liked musical theater. But I wasn't like a musical theater, I wasn't like that into it. Like I liked it. I loved it, but I wasn't like, I didn't know who Stephen Sondheim was, for instance. Like everybody who's in I knew who Andrew Lloyd Webber was, but I never heard of Stephen Sondheim before. I was listening to like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and the Beatles and U2 and like all those bands. Like that's what I wanted, but I was not nearly cool enough to be a rock star. So musical theater is where I ended up. And but I loved music and I loved acting. I had done tons of acting. I had been in shows. There was a lot I didn't know. And so when I moved to New York, I went to the American Musical and Dramatic Academy and like deep dive and learned all of these things and learned about, Stephen Sondheim's amazing, right? I mean, unfortunately, he passed away not too long ago, but he became like one of my idols. Like, the guy's amazing. But I didn't know who he was before I moved here. The same thing when it came to when I started getting involved in the internet and learning how to program and do website development and digital marketing. I didn't know any of that stuff. And I learned it all, and I was self-taught. And so the same thing happened with real estate. And so I just dug in deep. Kiyosaki said something about in the book, in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, about a seminar will come to your town and you should go to it no matter what it is, because you'll meet like-minded people, even if the seminar is not good. And lo and behold, about 2 weeks later, I'm driving in my car and an ad comes on the radio, learn how to do tax liens, blah, 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 blah. So I pulled off to the side of the road, grabbed a pen out of my car. I remembered my dad used to do this because my dad, I told you, was in real estate, in residential. He used to, every time we would go by a for sale by owner, And my dad wasn't even doing real estate anymore. He had a catering business. But anytime we would drive by a for sale by owner, he'd pull over the car and write down the number and call the people. But so here I am. I pull over the car and I write down the number, and I get home and I call the number, and I'm registered for this tax lien course. I mean, that was my start into it. Then I started getting into podcasts. I actually have a section in the book that I call Podcast University. And I have also a monthly newsletter that I send out called the BackStage Briefing. And Nick, you were actually in one of the first ever newsletters. You were the first ever what I call Podcast University, which is the bottom section, which will have like a link to a podcast. And that's how I learned a lot at the beginning. And that really helped me change my mindset from where I had been as an example, someone who wanted to pay off all of their debt, to where I am now as an investor, realizing that if you responsibly leverage your properties, and the key being responsibly, you can actually grow your wealth larger and faster through properly having some debt. So this is where in Podcast University, where my mindset changed and I started to learn a lot of these basic principles of real estate.
Oh my gosh. There's a lot to unpack right there, Matt. Thank you for sharing that.
Sorry.
No, I'm good. I am all for, I feel like Dave Ramsey is needed for a certain subsect of the American public, right? And then I also feel like he should be completely attacked and all of his shit burned in a fire. If you have that base level down, you now have to go to the intermediate level and then the advanced level. And it's not like this is what you should do for life. So I love that you just said that, responsibly using debt and leverage, right? I mean, 2,500 units bought and sold, right? How long would it have taken you to save up the money to buy those assets cash? Right?
Never. I wouldn't have been able to do it without syndication. I just published a blog this morning, actually, that talks about what is syndication. But the whole thing that I wrote in the post was like, I didn't know what to do. I was stuck, right? How do I do what was this hobby of mine? How do I make that a business? And then I found out about syndication. I was like, oh, there's other investors, and I can like give them my money, invest with them in their deals, and they can invest with me in my deals. And then all of a sudden we can take down these otherwise unobtainable assets. You know, how am I going to buy a $10 million, $20 million property? There's no way I could have done that on my own. No way.
Yeah. So, all right, going back to the first year out, now you've taken the shot, you're in real estate full time. What was your, say, 3 action steps that you said, I'm going to do these 3 things every day? Like your first 3 things that you figured out, this was helping me, I'm going to go through that part of it.
Well, for me, that seminar that I went to, while I didn't end up doing, going down that path, I did a little bit and realized it wasn't the right path for me. I realized that meeting with people and creating those relationships was really important. So one of the things that I did during that first year was look to sign up for other conferences, seminars, and try to be around other like-minded people and go to meetups. Eventually, I found that there was no meetups in South Florida at that time that were specific for multifamily. So I created my own. But that was all what I did during my first year. So that was sort of one avenue of the meeting and talking with investors. The other avenue that I went down was Podcast University, which I had mentioned, trying to listen to podcasts and read books. I have an entire bookshelf filled with real estate books, some good, some bad. I think the best one is called BackStage Guide to Real Estate. Just kidding. But you know, a whole bunch of books. And then thirdly was trying to, it sort of dovetails with the first one, which was trying to meet other investors, but also trying to meet others in the industry, specifically brokers and property managers. So I could see what they had, develop relationships, and learn from them what was going on in particular markets. So those are 3 things that I would recommend people do. You know, talk with other investors, meet with other investors, podcasts and books. I've heard the Shut Up and Do It podcast is amazing. But your listeners are already on it. So if you're hearing this, you already know that. And also meeting with brokers and property managers is really important to develop those relationships.
Amen. Powerful 3 steps right there. So if you don't know where to go, you start by aligning yourself, educating yourself, but then you also took action. You went, which was the calling the brokers, calling the property managers. A lot of people can get caught in that web, right, of just self-improvement, reading all the books, listening to podcasts, and you need to do that. There's a piece of you that needs to do that. Then there's also a piece that, okay, after you've been listening to a podcast on YouTube University and reading all these books for 3 years, might be time for you to start picking up the phone or emailing or reaching out to people that you can actually start having relationships with and not just educate yourself, right? Because a lot of people get stuck in that web too. So you already had the experience, you had the credibility, like you knew how to just pick up the phone or to send out emails and texts and get a hold of people that you knew that you could help, that you could help them. And then they in turn could help you kind of build your business, right?
Yeah, I think so. I do think that the acting background came in handy with me sort of not being afraid to make a phone call and make a fool out of myself, which I'm sure I did in those early days, maybe, using the wrong terminology or something here and there, right? But I mean, having that confidence of just being able to go ahead and feel comfortable speaking and being able to face rejection, because this business, there's a lot of rejection, a lot of offers you put out and you don't get, or if you're looking for investors, some investors are interested in your deals. Sometimes they're not. You can't take it personally, and you just have to keep going.
That's it. And I love that relationship to you being on stage, because there's really no, some people could say there's no scarier profession, right? Than not only subjecting yourself to being on stage in the production, but subjecting yourself to what I was reading about, the audition process. Horrible. Like you were even, if you don't mind highlighting that part of it, like, okay, I wore this outfit and I sang this song for my audition. They liked it, and therefore there's the magic code to get to the next one. But how did you not take that all personally at the beginning? Like, there must have been a piece of you, right?
I think I had been well trained from an early age, because I was always involved in like community theater and stuff like that. So there have been other things that I had not, didn't get, especially like in high school, whatever. There were shows that maybe I wanted to be in that I didn't get. Although I was the lead in my senior high school musical, Seymour in Little Shop of Horrors. It was awesome.
Ooh,
but
good one.
Oh yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. But I think that I just have been trained that that's what's going to happen. Sometimes I say this to people. It's interesting. I draw a lot of parallels in conversations with people between the stage and the acting world and real estate. Maybe I should write a book or a pamphlet or something to connect those two, because I didn't really do that in this book. But there's so many different parallels, and so one of them being, when I talk with people who are aspiring to syndicate deals, and they maybe haven't gotten one yet, I tell them, listen, if you submit an LOI, right, a letter of intent, and the broker invites you into a best and final round, okay, it doesn't matter if you get the property. And I firmly believe that when you're first getting started. Yeah. And that's how I felt about my auditions. So when I would audition for a show, all I really cared about was if I would get a call back. And the reason why is because after you get that call back, that you're right for the role. And I talk about in the book, and Nick, you probably aren't going to remember this, 2 instances where I got callbacks, I didn't get the show, and then ended up getting the show eventually, right? Yep. Because of persistence, which is one of the themes in the book. But there's so many factors why you might not get cast in a role. For me, I'm really short, right? So maybe I'm too short for, I'm supposed to play opposite, let's say, a woman, and she's taller than me. Or let's say I'm auditioning to play someone's son, and the father is blonde and is between me and a blonde-headed kid. And they're like, all right, we're going to give it to the blonde because we're both very good, but the other one looks like his son and I don't, right? So there are those types of things that happen when you're auditioning for a show that you have no control over. So as far as I was concerned, as long as I made it to the callback, I did a good job. And I say the same thing with syndication. As long as you get into that best and final round, you don't know what the situation, the other person might be offering all cash, right? You can't compete with that. This guy's got $3 million all cash for a down payment. Like you're not going to win that, but you made it to the best and final round. And I have had a situation where I made it to best and final. I was not awarded the property. And 30 days later, broker came back to me. I ended up getting the property. So you never know what's going to happen.
I love that. We talk about that a lot, falling in love with the process over the outcome, right? Like falling in love with what you do on a day-to-day basis and getting really good at what you do on a day-to-day basis, but never being attached to that outcome. The outcome will come if you're getting really good at what you do on a day-to-day basis. So I love that. And you're right.
100%.
The auditioning world to the stage world and real estate world are very similar in that effect. And I love that. I love that you know, the more people are so afraid to pick up the phone, Matt. People are afraid to put LOIs out, right? I mean, what are they going to think of me? I don't have the right terminology. I don't have, you know, what if this guru that's not applicable to, you know, New Hampshire or Texas or Florida? Like, so it's an LOI, right? Let them berate you. It's not personal to them either. They don't care. They're not going to take the energy to berate you. And if they do, there's a problem with them over you, right?
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love this. Your first deal and journey into your first deal that you GP'd.
Yeah.
How did that manifest for you?
Well, after analyzing around 117 properties in depth and submitting multiple LOIs, I was clued in by a property management company in Kansas City about property that they managed in Lawrence, which is right next to Kansas City, but it's not really Kansas City. And they said, listen, we've got this great property that we're managing, and the owners of the property are looking to sell. And it's exactly what you're looking for. So would you like me to introduce you to the broker? And I said, sure, because this broker, I have been meeting and developing relationships with brokers and property managers. I hadn't met this broker. This broker she's awesome. She's great, but she doesn't really do a huge volume of deals. So she wasn't on my radar. I had never met her. So I met her. And I mean, this was a whole long process that I go into detail in the book, but basically, you know, I made an offer on the property. All the offers had come in too low. The property was taken off the market. And then I kept talking with the broker and kept pushing at it and pushing at it and pushing at it. And eventually we convinced the seller to sell it to me at a price that was, you know, above what I had initially offered, but was still a very good price. And you know, we took that deal down. It was a almost $10 million purchase price, 132 units. That was my first deal. So for those people who've never done one of these before, and it's like, maybe I need to start with a 20 unit or a 30 unit, I would say you don't need to start there. You certainly can. There's nothing wrong with that. But prior to the 132 units, the largest property I had purchased was a duplex in Brooklyn. But you know, we bought the property, managed it well, and ended up selling it a few years later, and did very well with that one. It was a nice profit for the investors.
So it ended up being relationship marketing, right? And I presume, I want to be cautious because I there's a guru out there that spits out saying, just start with the 250 unit buildings, and you can do that, but you also had your life experience mixed with your education that you've self-educated with real estate, mixed with your relationships that you had made and probably strategic partnerships, right? All that came together, right? Because it probably would be difficult for someone with taking one weekend course to then go off and buy a 200 unit building. Do you agree?
Well, I would put it this way. By themselves, it would be very difficult.
Yes.
what I did, and what I see a lot of people do who are new to this business, is working with somebody else who is more experienced.
Yep.
Right. So I had somebody who co-sponsored this deal with me who had done, I think, 10 syndications at that time. We've I think it would have been very difficult for me to do this deal without him. I don't want to say it would have been impossible, because I had taken a number of steps, and it was about 2 years since I had started to want to do this before I closed on that first deal. So at that point, I had invested as a limited partner in about 5 deals. I had been a key principal in one of those deals, which had a Fannie Mae loan, which then therefore started to qualify me for Fannie Mae. But I think having this partner on my side was helpful, and helpful when I was talking with my investors. I mean, my investors, I think, knew me from business and personally, but had never invested in real estate with me. And I didn't have a track record in large multifamily. I had a track record in some small scale fix and flips, but it is a different beast to a certain extent. So I think partnering with an experienced person, yes, you could take something down right away. On your own, like, I couldn't have just gone to a weekend course and the next day closed on that property. There's no way the broker would have sold it to me. I honestly believe that. You have to build up that relationship and trust with the broker so they know you can actually come to the closing table and close on a $10 million deal.
Yep. Amen to that. Thank you for sharing. So let's now move into the why and the how on your book, because this was a baby in itself. I only know a piece of that. I've written a story in a book. You wrote a whole book. Tell me why, and also the process. That would be fantastic.
Sure. So, Nick, about the power of meetups. You have a very powerful, extremely well-attended meetup group in the Boston area. And I didn't start, but I picked up one, right, and ran one for a number of years and grew that one in Boston, and used to come to it. We actually spoke, I think maybe twice, definitely at least once. You did a Halloween horror story, which was awesome.
I can't believe you remember that. Yes.
The deal horrors
of multifamily. That's right.
Oh, it was awesome though. It was great. Great attendance. Awesome story. I mean, Nick, I love listening to you and seeing you present, because you're just really good. You've got great stories and a great personality, and just tell your stories extremely well. So it's a pleasure to watch you and hear you. But so that meetup, when I took it over, it was like around 20 or 30 people. We grew it, right? There was usually at least 100. Sometimes we were getting 200 people at that meetup. And a lot of the people who were coming to the meetup were interested in investing in multifamily and maybe owned like a triple decker. Like, a lot of people had triple deckers in Worcester. That was kind of like almost almost like you had to have one of those to get into the meetup. It was just a lot of people had them and wanted to expand beyond, let's say, a triple decker, but didn't have millions of dollars to invest. And we're learning about syndication, and we're getting comfortable with the idea of investing out of state, investing into syndications. And a lot of them would come to me and say, "Hey, Matt, I'm thinking about investing in my first deal. Would you mind spending some time with me and looking at this deal with me? Let me know what you think." A lot of my portfolio, 2/3 of my portfolio, are deals that I'm a passive investor in, right? 1/3 of them are ones that I actively manage. I'm a general partner, but I have, criteria that I look for when I'm looking to limited partner. And I use that same criteria for my investors when I'm GPing, but I was happy to sit down with people and kind of walk them through, take a look at the deal, and sort of point out things like, I might ask the sponsor about this thing or that. I would never tell people, do this deal or don't do this deal, because that's not my place. But I would say, listen, if I was looking at this deal, I might ask a question about this thing or wonder about that thing, and see what the sponsor says. And if you feel comfortable with their answer, then maybe you should invest. It started taking up a lot of my time. And,
Yeah.
for a fleeting moment, I was like, maybe I should charge people, to like analyze deals with them. And I don't know, it just didn't feel right. But I was like, I need to figure out something because I'm missing other meetings and other things that I need to be doing to drive to Waltham to sit in a cafe with someone for an hour and a half and basically like teach them underwriting almost, and and I said, you know what? I should just write all this down. And I have been toying around with that idea for maybe 6 months to a year. And I finally said, you know what? I'm going to sit down. I'm going to write it. And I wrote a book. I dictated a book actually to my iPhone, which did a terrible job of translating it into actual words. But I created a book. It was about an 80 to 90 page book. And it was talking about sort of deal analysis and how to look at these deals. And it was really terrible. Like, it was just boring. Like, it had good information in there, right? I'll tell you, I think the information in there was golden, but unless you're Nick Alrud and really know real estate and can deal with reading through this really dry, dense material, I don't think it would land. And I was not writing it for the Knicks of the world. I was writing it for, someone who'd never done multifamily before, right? Someone who maybe was had a business, or they were a business professional of one sort or another and wanted to do this, wanted to get involved in it, and wanted to know enough to evaluate a deal. But, I needed to make it a little more palatable. What I ended up doing was went back and rewrote the book, but wrote it with the narrative of my life. So I start off with the early days with me not even knowing anything about real estate and going through basically the whole journey that we talked about on the podcast today, but in much more depth. And along that journey, I learned many lessons. And so I teach all of those lessons. I have like 60 different real estate definitions in that book, that as I go through the book, I explain all those definitions, and then they're in a glossary at the end of the book with an index so people could refer to that chapter. But I also teach these 18 keystone concepts that I learned throughout my journey. And so the book starts for someone who doesn't know anything about real estate. At the end of the book, we're talking about air rights deals and 1031 exchanges and some, these more advanced strategies, so that anybody, no matter where they are in their real estate journey, I think will get value out of this. And hopefully someone like yourself, Nick, who already knows a lot of the stuff in the earlier chapters, it tells some really interesting and funny stories about myself. It has a picture of me dressed in a loincloth, dancing down Main Street at Disney World, because I used to be a performer at Disney, right? So like that alone, that picture, I think is worth the price of admission. But it tells funny and interesting stories about my journey all the way through. And so that was kind of the impetus and the how. For me, I worked with a writing coach because I'm not a writer, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what I needed to be doing. And so the process was that I would write a chapter, send it over to the coach, and she would mark it up, as a Word doc, and say, delete this part here. This is interesting. Tell me more here. How did that make you feel? Or, things just kind of like coaxing it out of me, so that I think by the time I got to the end of the book, and it's interesting, like the first chapter I wrote actually ended up being chapter 4 in the book. Like it just kind of, just started me writing. And by the time I got to the end of the book, I felt really comfortable with my writing. And so I've been writing a lot more. I've got these blogs that I've been posting on my website and just creating some content. But I'm not a writer. And so having a coach, someone like that to help you along the way is key. And then, the original manuscript was done almost a year ago. And then, it was about editing. There's a lot of editing, line editing and copy editing and proofreading, and then the physical layout of the book and the cover and just a ton of stuff. It was actually a really eye-opening experience for me too, just looking at myself and who I am and what I stand for and my brand. I changed the name of my company during this whole process, and just really got clear on sort of who I am and what I want to be.
Powerful. So it's doing as much for your readers as it did for you to go through the process. Right?
Well, the process, yeah, was a very, it was not what I thought it would be. Like I learned so much, but I think the readers will get something completely different out of it. But I hope it's valuable. You know, I have beta readers who read it, and some people who've gotten early advanced copies, and they seem to really like it. So I'm hoping that it's something that people find of value.
It's definitely powerful to have story form. So as you know, we both put on presentations now, and we both have had that experience of going through multifamily underwriting with people and trying to teach them through it. And it's very difficult to make that exciting and interactive, not to mention putting it into a book form. So I love that it's turned into what you've turned it into, a story form of your life. People love to know about people's lives. And I thought it was very easy read. So the part, I haven't finished it yet, as I've told him, but the ones that I've read, about half of it, super easy read, goes through all of his, not just real estate lessons, but life lessons that he has gone through in his journey into real estate, but also, as you've heard today, what he's learned from his stage theater expertise, what he's learned from starting his tech company, right? Like every single, and how he deals with investors to today. Like what people need to hear is the context, and you have done an amazing job putting that context into play in this book. So can you, do you have a copy to show to the camera? Can you grab that one? Or?
Right over there. I think I have another one right over here. Hold on. Sorry. Glad I have this nearby. I just got these physical copies the other day.
There it is. BackStage Guide to Real Estate. Produce passive income, write your own story, and direct your dollars towards positive change. That's one thing we didn't even discuss today, Matt. Everything that we have now found on a higher purpose level, right? So it's all, first it's creating the money to pay off our expenses. Then it's creating money to be comfortable. But maybe then it becomes something a much deeper, right? A much more profound impact on the communities that we are investing in and bettering on a day-to-day basis, right? We didn't even touch on that today, but that's also in this book, which I think that is what really drives people to get up in the morning, right? Like once you win the money game, then it becomes what's next. And that's its purpose and its impact. What can we do to help create more of that? And I love that you've taken that side. It's a huge deal.
I agree. I mean, for me, it's about changing the narrative on the stereotypical evil landlord and showing how property ownership can be a positive for communities, right? By making things better, by improving services, by sometimes we will acquire a property and they'll have tickets, maintenance tickets that date back 6 months to a year, and one of our first goals is, okay, let's get all of those tickets serviced. Let's get everybody's property running properly and make this a really nice community for people to live in. And so that's something that does get me excited, and that makes me want to jump out of bed in the morning.
I love that. Before we wrap things up today, so how can people get a copy of the book, Matt?
So go to Picheny.com, Picheny.com, Picheny.com. That's where you can find out more about the book. There's links to buy it there. I also have like a newsletter. There's the blog. There's tons of information on that website. So Picheny.com.
That's fantastic. And is there what's the thing you're most excited about right now as you head off this week? I know we're approaching, well, when this airs, we're in the beginnings of 2022, right? What is something you're most excited about right now?
I'm very excited about the first weekend of 2022 because I'm going to be spending that entire weekend at a goals retreat. Yes. Working on setting my goals, short and long term, which is going to be very exciting. I have a lot of stuff that I want to work on in 2022, and just getting it all down on paper and I think will be really good. So, and I talk about that in the book too. Goal setting is super important. So if you're listening to this and it's early 2022, or whenever you're listening to this, if you don't have your goals actually written down, you might be very surprised at what writing them down on paper, or I actually typed them, so putting them in pixels on your computer, can actually do for you.
Amen to that. And I'll add, and I haven't read that chapter yet, but I will add to that by saying we also set up accountability measures every quarter to look back and then course correct, right? Because you have to have them in front of you. You have to know what they are. And then also, just like any corporate job that we have for ourselves, let's hold ourselves accountable, right? Quarterly check-in benchmark meetings with ourselves, CEOs of our own companies. So
that's awesome. I love it.
I love it, Matt. Matt, thank you so much for your time today, man. You always bring the fire. Thank you very much. I love your attitude, love your energy. For those of you guys who are listening in today, the BackStage Guide to Real Estate is on Picheny.com, Picheny.com. Make sure you get to that website to check out the book and check out everything else that Matt has available for you, his newsletters, and also as he continues to grow and build communities in across the country. You can also find out opportunities to how to work with him and his firm and that side of it too. But for right now, folks, thanks so much for taking part in another episode of the Shut Up and Do It Real Estate Podcast, where we go through, bring as much value as we can by bringing you awesome people like Matt. Matt, we thank you for your time today. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons below to be notified when we have new podcasts out. It also helps us with our subscriber count. We really appreciate that. And head on over to shutupanddoitrealestate.com for all the episodes. And lastly, if you're local to the real estate Boston market, be sure to take part. There's as Matt offered, the multifamily meetup that he began is still currently running in Newton. I believe it's called the Multifamily Meetup, or the Greater Boston Multifamily. Do you remember what it's called, Matt?
Multifamily Investors of Massachusetts. It's a mouthful.
Thank you. Multifamily Investors of Massachusetts is the meetup that is in Newton that Matt began. We also have our meetup, as Matt had thank you for the plug earlier. It's called REI Unleashed. We are also on Facebook, and we have reiunleashed.com. Be sure to check in with that, with our 3 meetings a month that we have through the Boston area and virtually. So until next time, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Don't forget to shut up and do it.